Silence is often mistaken for weakness, but there comes a moment when an empath becomes so deeply connected to their own truth that everything around them begins to change. The surprising part is that this transformation is almost invisible. There is no dramatic announcement, no loud confrontation, no sudden desire for revenge, yet it quietly shifts the balance of every relationship they have. The people who once ignored their boundaries start feeling uncertain. Those who relied on guilt or emotional pressure suddenly find that their usual tactics no longer work. Friends notice a calm confidence that was never there before. Family members sense that old patterns are no longer being accepted. Even strangers respond differently. This is not because the empath has become colder or less caring. It is because they have crossed a psychological line that very few people ever reach. Most discussions about empaths focus on kindness, compassion, and emotional sensitivity, but almost no one talks about the rare stage where empathy is guided by wisdom instead of fear. This is the moment an empath stops asking for permission to be themselves and quietly becomes the authority of their own life. It is one of the least understood shifts in human psychology because it happens internally long before anyone else notices it on the outside. In this video, you will discover why this change is so uncommon, what causes it, and how it completely reshapes the way an empath thinks, feels, and responds to the world. You will learn why emotional maturity is far more powerful than emotional intensity, why healthy boundaries often confuse people who benefited from your self-sacrifice, and why true confidence rarely looks loud or aggressive. You will also uncover the hidden psychological changes that make an empath far more difficult to manipulate without losing their compassion or humanity. By the end of this video, you will understand why the strongest empaths are not the ones who give the most, but the ones who finally understand where their responsibility ends and someone else's begins. This journey is deeper than personality, deeper than emotions, and deeper than simple self-improvement. It is an inner transformation that quietly changes every conversation, every decision, and every relationship from that point forward. Stay with us until the very end because the final insight brings all of these pieces together and explains why this rare shift is one of the greatest forms of personal freedom a person can experience. Welcome to the channel where we explore the hidden psychology of empathy, emotional intelligence, and personal growth. If these topics speak to you and you want more thoughtful insights that challenge the way you see yourself and others, subscribe now and join us for the journey. One of the biggest misunderstandings about empaths is the belief that kindness automatically means weakness. Many people look at someone who listens patiently, forgives easily, avoids conflict, and cares deeply for others, then assume that person lacks strength. This mistake happens because the strongest battles an empath faces usually take place inside their own mind, where no one else can see them. An empath often notices emotions that others ignore. They sense tension before anyone speaks. They recognize sadness behind a smile and fear hidden beneath anger. Because they naturally understand what other people are feeling, they often respond with compassion instead of judgment. To an outside observer, this can look like submission or a lack of confidence. In reality, many empaths are carrying emotional weight that does not even belong to them. They spend so much time trying to keep peace, reduce conflict, and help others heal that they slowly forget to ask a simple question: what do I need? This question becomes quieter over time until it almost disappears. Instead of making choices based on their own well-being, they begin making choices based on how everyone else might react. They learn to avoid disappointing people. They become experts at reading the room before expressing an opinion. They apologize even when they have done nothing wrong because keeping everyone comfortable feels safer than risking rejection. At first, these habits seem harmless. They even receive praise for them. People call them caring, generous, thoughtful, and selfless. Those words sound beautiful, but they can also hide a dangerous pattern. When empathy exists without healthy boundaries, it slowly changes into self-sacrifice. The empath starts believing that love must always cost something. They believe being a good person means putting themselves last. They confuse endless giving with emotional maturity. Little by little, they become responsible for feelings that were never theirs to carry. If someone is upset, they immediately wonder what they did wrong. If someone becomes distant, they search for ways to fix the relationship. If someone behaves badly, they excuse the behavior because they understand the pain behind it. Understanding another person's pain is valuable, but understanding does not erase responsibility. Many empaths fail to see this difference during the early stages of their journey. They become emotionally available to everyone except themselves. Their own exhaustion is ignored because someone else always seems to need them more. As the years pass, this pattern creates a quiet distance between the empath and their own identity. Their life becomes centered around meeting expectations instead of discovering personal values. They know everyone else's preferences but struggle to name their own. They know how to comfort others, but rarely know how to comfort themselves. They become skilled at recognizing emotional changes in friends, family members, and partners while becoming strangers to their own emotional world. This disconnect does not happen overnight. It grows through hundreds of small moments. Saying yes when they wanted to say no. Staying silent when honesty was needed. Ignoring exhaustion because someone else needed support. Accepting disrespect because they feared losing the relationship. Every compromise feels small, but together they slowly reshape a person's identity. The empath begins measuring their worth by how useful they are to other people. If they are needed, they feel valuable. If they are not needed, they question their purpose. This creates an emotional dependence that is often mistaken for love. Instead of building relationships based on mutual respect, they build relationships around constant giving. The problem is that people who benefit from unlimited access rarely encourage healthy limits. Some become comfortable receiving without giving back. Others begin expecting sacrifices that should never have been expected. Without realizing it, the empath teaches people that their own needs can always wait. The sad reality is that the more they ignore themselves, the more invisible they become in their own life. This stage is not the end of the empath's story. It is only the beginning. Beneath the endless giving, beneath the quiet patience, and beneath the constant need to keep everyone happy, another version of the empath is slowly developing. At first, it is almost impossible to notice. Small moments of discomfort begin appearing. They leave conversations feeling drained instead of fulfilled. They notice that certain relationships only exist when they are providing emotional support. They start asking why kindness seems to attract people who take more than they give. These questions are uncomfortable because they challenge beliefs that have guided them for years. They have always believed that giving more would create stronger relationships. They have always believed that if they loved enough, understood enough, and sacrificed enough, everything would eventually become balanced. Reality begins teaching a different lesson. Some people do not appreciate endless compassion. Some simply become accustomed to it. Others mistake patience for permission. Instead of respecting generosity, they learn to depend on it without gratitude. Slowly, the empath starts noticing patterns they once ignored. Then comes the breaking point. Rarely does it arrive through one dramatic event. More often, it grows through repeated disappointments that slowly wear down emotional resilience. One betrayal may be forgiven, then another follows. Broken promises become familiar. Manipulation becomes easier to recognize. Emotional guilt becomes predictable. Relationships begin feeling one-sided. The empath gives encouragement but receives criticism. They offer loyalty but experience dishonesty. They remain available while others disappear whenever responsibility appears. Over time, emotional exhaustion replaces hope. The heart that once overflowed with patience begins feeling empty. Simple conversations become tiring. Helping others no longer feels meaningful because there is nothing left to give. The empath realizes they are surviving instead of living. This exhaustion is different from ordinary stress. It reaches deeper because it touches identity itself. It forces a painful realization that kindness alone cannot build healthy relationships. Compassion cannot replace accountability. Understanding another person's wounds cannot heal wounds they refuse to face themselves. Pain changes its purpose during this stage. Instead of being an enemy, it becomes a teacher. The empath begins looking inward instead of outward. For years, they searched for ways to become better for everyone else. Now they begin asking whether they have been fair to themselves. This single change in perspective transforms everything. Rather than blaming themselves for every failed relationship, they begin examining the choices that allowed unhealthy patterns to continue. They ask why they believed saying no was selfish. They question why disagreement felt dangerous. They wonder why approval became more valuable than peace. These questions are uncomfortable because they expose beliefs formed through years of experience, childhood conditioning, cultural expectations, or repeated emotional patterns. Yet these questions also open the door to genuine growth. The empath slowly understands that being compassionate does not require abandoning themselves. They realize that protecting their peace is not cruelty. It is responsibility. This is where the rare inner shift begins. Becoming the authority of your own life does not mean controlling others. It means finally accepting responsibility for your own emotional direction. The empath no longer waits for someone else to decide whether they are worthy. Approval stops becoming the foundation of confidence. Permission is no longer needed before expressing thoughts, setting limits, or making decisions. They stop asking whether everyone else will be comfortable with their choices before considering what is healthy for them. This change is quiet yet incredibly powerful. There are no dramatic speeches, no desire to prove anyone wrong. Instead, there is a calm certainty that their life belongs to them. They begin recognizing that every person is responsible for managing their own emotions. Compassion remains, but unhealthy responsibility disappears. They no longer believe it is their job to rescue every struggling person or solve every emotional conflict. They can support others without carrying their burdens. They can care deeply without becoming emotionally consumed. As this shift grows stronger, identity begins moving inward instead of outward. The empath no longer defines themselves by praise, approval, or acceptance. Compliments become appreciated rather than required. Criticism becomes information rather than a personal attack. Rejection loses much of its power because self-worth is no longer built upon another person's opinion. Decisions become guided by personal values instead of fear of disappointing others. This creates a remarkable psychological change. Emotional regulation improves because reactions are no longer driven by panic or guilt. Self-awareness deepens because attention finally turns inward. Instead of constantly scanning other people's emotions, the empath begins recognizing their own thoughts, limits, and needs with equal clarity. Intuition also becomes stronger, but it changes in an important way. It is no longer fueled by anxiety or the desperate need to predict everyone's feelings. It becomes guided by wisdom gained through experience. Patterns become easier to recognize. Empty promises lose their influence. Manipulation becomes visible much earlier than before. Confidence also changes its appearance. It becomes quieter. There is less need to explain every decision or defend every boundary. The empath discovers that real confidence does not seek constant agreement. It simply remains steady. Choices become clearer because guilt is no longer making every decision. Instead of asking, "Will everyone approve?" the question becomes, "Is this healthy, honest, and true to who I am?" That single shift changes not only the decisions they make, but also the person they continue becoming. The moment an empath begins living from inner authority instead of constant emotional obligation, relationships start changing in ways that often surprise everyone involved. The first changes are usually quiet. Conversations feel different. Old patterns no longer work. Reactions become calmer. The empath stops trying to solve every problem that appears in front of them. They listen without immediately taking responsibility. They care without carrying every emotional burden. They become supportive without abandoning themselves. Healthy people usually recognize this change very quickly, and instead of resisting it, they respect it. They understand that boundaries are not walls built to keep love out. They are healthy limits that allow trust and respect to grow. These people do not become offended when the empath says no. They do not demand endless explanations. They appreciate honesty because they also value honesty in return. Relationships with emotionally healthy people often become stronger after this shift because both individuals begin sharing responsibility instead of expecting one person to carry everything. There is more balance. There is more openness. There is less pressure to perform, rescue, or constantly prove loyalty. Conversations become more genuine because they are no longer driven by fear of disappointing one another. The empath begins experiencing a kind of peace that once felt impossible. They realize that healthy relationships do not require endless sacrifice. They require mutual respect, honesty, and emotional responsibility from both sides. Not everyone welcomes this transformation. People who became comfortable benefiting from the empath's lack of boundaries often react very differently. Some become confused because their usual methods no longer work. Emotional guilt loses its power. Silent treatment no longer creates panic. Constant criticism no longer destroys confidence. The empath still listens, but they no longer automatically accept blame for every conflict. They begin asking difficult questions instead of immediately apologizing. They notice when words and actions do not match. They recognize manipulation without feeling responsible for fixing it. This change can feel threatening to people who relied on emotional control. They may accuse the empath of becoming selfish, distant, cold, or uncaring. These accusations often sound convincing because they target the very qualities the empath values most. In the past, such words would have created overwhelming guilt. Now the empath pauses before accepting them. They ask whether setting a healthy boundary is actually harmful, or whether someone simply dislikes losing control. This small pause changes everything. Manipulation depends on automatic emotional reactions. When those reactions become thoughtful instead of immediate, manipulation begins losing its influence. The empath no longer feels compelled to defend every decision or justify every limit. They understand that disagreement is not proof they have done something wrong. As these changes continue, some relationships naturally begin fading away. This can be one of the most painful parts of emotional growth because not every connection survives when unhealthy patterns disappear. Some friendships existed mainly because the empath always gave more than they received. Some family dynamics depended on silence instead of honesty. Some romantic relationships were built on emotional dependence rather than mutual respect. When the empath stops playing the old role, these relationships sometimes lose the foundation they were standing on. This does not always happen through dramatic endings. Sometimes people simply drift apart because the dynamic has changed. Sometimes distance develops naturally because shared values no longer exist. At first, this loss can feel frightening. The empath may wonder if becoming healthier has made them lonelier, but with time they begin understanding that not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some relationships serve as lessons rather than lifelong connections. Holding on to every relationship at any cost often prevents growth. Letting go creates space for healthier people to enter their life. The empty space left behind may feel uncomfortable, but it is often where emotional freedom begins growing. New boundaries gradually attract different kinds of relationships. Instead of people who expect endless availability, the empath begins connecting with individuals who appreciate honesty and mutual effort. They no longer feel pressured to hide their needs or ignore their limits. They discover that the strongest relationships are not built by one person giving everything, while the other simply receives. Real connection grows when both people feel safe enough to express themselves honestly. The empath also notices that respect becomes easier to recognize. They stop confusing attention with love. They stop confusing emotional intensity with emotional depth. They understand that consistency matters more than beautiful promises. A person who repeatedly shows kindness through actions becomes more valuable than someone who constantly speaks about loyalty without demonstrating it. This shift changes the way they choose relationships. Instead of asking who needs them the most, they begin asking who shares the same values of honesty, responsibility, and respect. This new way of living is often misunderstood because many people confuse inner authority with control. They look at someone who confidently sets boundaries and assume that person has become dominant or emotionally distant. In reality, the opposite is true. Control focuses on changing other people. Inner authority focuses on leading yourself. A controlling person tries to force agreement, demand obedience, or shape others according to personal expectations. An empath who has developed inner authority does none of these things. They understand that every individual has the right to make their own choices. They simply refuse to betray themselves in order to gain acceptance. This difference is enormous. One approach is built on fear of losing control. The other is built on trust in one's own values. The empath no longer wastes energy trying to convince everyone to understand them. They know that understanding cannot be forced. Respect cannot be demanded. Love cannot be controlled. Their responsibility ends with their own actions, not with someone else's opinions. Authority grows from self-trust. It develops when a person repeatedly keeps promises to themselves. Every time the empath honors a healthy boundary, listens to their intuition, or chooses self-respect over approval, trust becomes stronger. Slowly, they stop questioning every decision they make. This does not mean they become perfect. They still make mistakes. They still experience uncertainty. But uncertainty no longer destroys their confidence because they know they can learn, adjust, and continue moving forward. Their worth is no longer connected to flawless performance. It comes from knowing they will not abandon themselves when life becomes difficult. This quiet trust changes the way they walk into conversations, relationships, and challenges. They stop searching every room for signs of approval. They stop measuring their value through other people's reactions. They understand that someone disagreeing with them does not reduce their worth. They no longer feel the need to explain every choice in endless detail. Sometimes a calm and respectful no is enough. Sometimes silence communicates confidence more clearly than long arguments ever could. One of the hidden strengths that develops during this stage is emotional maturity. Unlike confidence built on pride or ego, emotional maturity rarely attracts attention. It often appears ordinary from the outside. The empath speaks calmly instead of raising their voice. They pause before reacting. They ask questions before making assumptions. They admit mistakes without collapsing into shame. They remain kind without becoming easy to exploit. Many people overlook these qualities because they expect strength to look dramatic. They associate power with dominance, loud opinions, or winning every argument. Emotional maturity follows a different path. It chooses understanding over proving a point. It values long-term peace over short-term victory. The empath discovers that not every disagreement deserves a response. Not every criticism deserves attention. Not every invitation to conflict requires participation. Walking away from unnecessary battles is no longer viewed as weakness. It becomes an act of wisdom. Their energy is treated as something valuable instead of something available to everyone. This quiet confidence also makes manipulation far more difficult. Manipulative behavior often depends on creating confusion, guilt, urgency, or self-doubt. The empath who trusts themselves notices these patterns much earlier. They no longer rush decisions because someone demands an immediate answer. They no longer ignore uncomfortable feelings simply to avoid conflict. They pay close attention to actions instead of persuasive words. Promises alone are no longer enough. Consistency becomes the true measure of character. They understand that trust should be earned through repeated behavior rather than emotional speeches. This awareness protects them without making them cynical. They remain open-hearted, but they are no longer unguarded. Compassion stays alive, while wisdom quietly takes the lead. Reaching this stage is not about becoming someone completely different. It begins by accepting painful experiences without allowing those experiences to become a permanent identity. The empath stops defining themselves only through betrayal, disappointment, or sacrifice. They recognize that painful chapters explain part of their journey, but they do not decide the ending. Healthy boundaries become daily habits instead of occasional acts of courage. Emotional independence grows through small choices made consistently over time. Self-respect becomes a practice rather than a feeling that depends on praise. They trust actions more than words, both in themselves and in others. Every decision starts reflecting personal values instead of fear of rejection. Slowly, almost without noticing, they build a life where peace is no longer earned by pleasing everyone else but by remaining honest with the person they have finally learned to value most. Becoming the authority of your own life has never been about controlling other people. It has never been about winning arguments, proving your value, or making those who hurt you regret their choices. The deepest transformation happens quietly, where no one else can see it at first. It begins the moment you stop asking the world to tell you who you are and start trusting the person you have become. That is the rare shift so few people truly understand. An empath does not become powerful by caring less. They become powerful by caring wisely. They stop carrying burdens that were never theirs. They stop confusing self-sacrifice with love. They stop measuring their worth by how much they can give away. Instead, they build a life guided by self-respect, emotional clarity, and inner peace. That kind of strength cannot be taken from you because it no longer depends on praise, approval, or acceptance. It comes from within, and once that happens, manipulation loses its grip, fear loses its voice, and every relationship begins from a place of choice instead of obligation. The truth is that this journey is not finished in a single day. It unfolds through countless small decisions, every healthy boundary, every honest conversation, every moment you choose peace over people-pleasing becomes another step toward the person you were always meant to be. The world may not notice those changes immediately, but you will. One day you will realize that the situations which once drained your energy no longer control your emotions. The opinions that once kept you awake no longer define your confidence. The approval you once chased no longer determines your happiness. That is the quiet victory of an empath who has finally become the authority of their own life. Now take a moment and reflect on your own journey. Are you still learning to set boundaries? Are you beginning to question old patterns? Or have you already experienced this rare inner shift that changed the way you see yourself and everyone around you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story may encourage someone else who is walking the same path. If you found value in this video, don't forget to like it, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to the channel for more deep insights into psychology, empathy, emotional growth, and healthy relationships. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep growing, keep trusting yourself, and never forget that the greatest authority you will ever discover is the one that comes from within.